Excited to be here today with this illustrious guest panel to explore multi-dimensional levels of consciousness. And I am here with Alan Steinfeld.
Hi, good to see you. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure.
Do you want to know a little bit about me?
I would love to.
Okay. Let's see, in reference to this, I've been studying the idea that we are moving into new realities, that we're at the threshold of a new humanity. And I've been working a lot with the Hurtaks here at the Academy for Future Science, and I love the ancient alien and the Native American perspective. So I combine this all into the idea that who we thought we were, who we've been told we were as limited beings is not who we really are. So how do we stretch our mind to have new perceptions and new awarenesses of this multidimensional reality? We have the senses, and we can go into this, to tune into these other awarenesses. They're encoded in us, but they haven't been activated. We haven't been made aware that who we are as these great beings on planet Earth. So that's what my work's dedicated to, is the upliftment of the human spirit and the awareness that we are not who we've been told. We're much greater than that. And that's what our whole evolutionary moment in history is about. How are we going to wake up to who we really are? And that's the most exciting thing for me.
That's very exciting.
Okay.
And Clifford Mahooty. Welcome, Clifford.
Glad to be here.
And you are a Zuni tribal elder as well as an engineer, and you also were involved in the military and have done decades of research into paranormal experiences.
First of all, I come from an indigenous tribe called the Zuni Pueblo people of the Southwest. And within our records and within our backgrounds and systems, we actually practice a lot of those rituals, ceremonies, and the connection with all things universal, if you want to go that far. And we have been practicing this for centuries. No one knows. The old timer says it was a long, long time ago that we were given this knowledge, and we are still practicing it to this day. And one of the things that I'm writing for another presentation is that I wrote here just this morning, is that the Zuni history and belief is that our ancestors were created by the light source using the ingredients of Mother Earth and universal life breath. Zuni, Hopi, and other people say that this is the fourth world. The previous three worlds were destroyed because of evil practices by ancient people on the planet. So we have been aware of this shifting for a number of years. I thought that I would have never come to this point in my life, in my lifetime, to see the changes that are happening. We are very fast, we are in a very fast lane for this transition. And I call it a logarithmic growth pattern because of things that are happening so fast, and a lot of things that are seems to be abnormal at this time, but it's just a thing that we have to put up with for a while until all of us are in synchronicity with what all the different forces are doing on this planet and other places. And I have been working with this for a long time, not only as a person that participates in these activities, and what has really been intriguing to me is that the interpretation of all the things that we have been taught for a number of years, what our practices, our protocols, things given for what we call the upper world people, the priesthood of the upper world. We don't call them aliens, we don't call them ETs, we don't call them sky people, we call them the priesthood of the upper world. And so these are our teachers, they're our fathers, and they're also the ones that are protectors in many orders and in many different ways. We are only the personators of those people when we come down to the ancient practices, whether it be in the medicine, whether it be in what we call the Kachina society system, but we are all part of nature, and we have always been part of nature, and this is why we have been given that assignment, so to speak, for the rest of the world. And we don't only do that for ourselves as a Zuni nation, but we do it for all the other indigenous tribes and toward the whole people of the planet. And this has been given the charge from day one, if you want to call that. And so I'm glad to be here and to perhaps convey and say in simple terms what a complex system is. It's been taking me about at least 60 years, and I'm still a student in my own group, in my own system. So it's very enjoyable to get other people like the people here to get the input from their sources and to reinforce my thinking, and also the information that would help me to explain a lot of things that is so limited in our way, because we are only in this part of the world when we started coming to be part of the system. But we have always been aware that there's somebody else besides us, and all we're doing is following their system. Glad to be here.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And Desiree Hurtak.
Right, well, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having Dr. Hurtak and myself. We've been working in this field for over 40 years, and we've done a lot of work in Egypt, which ties in, I believe, to a lot of the ancient areas. When Clifford talked about previous civilizations, we feel this is some of the work that we've done, looking at what those previous civilizations have been. Done a lot of work, of course, in Mexico, especially in the Yucatan. And so this is our interest, but as well as understanding and having unique experiences about other levels of intelligence. So this is key for our own development. Myself, I have a PhD in environmental public policy, and so that's my real interest to see. When you talk about changes on the planet, I mean, we see this both, we'll say, environmentally as well as consciously, and that's what I hope we're going to be talking about today. Our work has been in writing numerous books and articles. We do everything for the Academy for Future Science. I'm one of the founders, and so is my husband, Dr. J.J. Hurtak. We bring everything from the studies of the multi-universe, which means that there's many universes from a scientific perspective, as well as work from the area of consciousness development, from understanding how we're all interconnected.
Thank you.
And as my wife has just said, I'm co-founder of our organization, the Academy for Future Science, which is a United Nations NGO. We've worked for over 45 years with the Indigenous in various parts of the world. I'm wearing one of the teaching belts from the Xavante people of Brazil. We represent 15 tribes, and our emphasis is on the preservation of the habitats that are rapidly being destroyed by environmental change and just by political neglect of the resources, the tremendous spiritual resources of the indigenous people. Thus, our model is the tree of life with the various branches of knowledge, and we are presently engaged on many levels, some with former astronauts, towards putting together a new cosmology of consciousness, which would show appreciation of our brothers and sisters throughout the world, and preparing us for what we believe to be a shift of consciousness, where we will graduate from being humankind to spacekind, seeing that we have a vast and awesome universe that we will participate in. Looking at thus the heritage of South America, Central America, North America, as well as Egypt and the Orient, where we have done research under the ocean with the Japanese, the Taiwanese, as well as under the pyramids of Egypt, where we were working with remote sensing specialists, radar specialists, to find the Temple of Osiris back in the 1990s. We're looking at the scientific evidence to support the great teachings of ancient wisdom, not just speculation, but actual scientific verification or ground truth. Brings us together with someone like Clifford, and I honor him very much for his work and also for his courage to speak up regarding the real science of what is going on behind the scenes.
Thank you. In your book, The Book of Knowledge, The Keys of Enoch, we talk a lot about consciousness programming from higher realms. And so I'm very interested to know how the Great Pyramid, scientifically and spiritually, ties into these 12 geophysical time warp areas around the globe to create these zones, time warp zones for ascension, communication between higher beings. It sounds to me like a consciousness network.
This is a very provocative question you ask, and many of you probably are not as familiar with my work as that of Robert Bevell, who published an amazing book called The Orion Mystery, based upon the relationship of the three great pyramids on the Giza Plateau and the Belt of Orion. Well, 20 years before Robert Bevell, we published, my wife and I, the Keys of Enoch, which highlights specifics between the three major pyramids and the Belt of Orion, naming in the Arabic and the Greek and in the astrophysical donations and alignments, the specific ties. This model, through my higher consciousness experience, is to be seen in indigenous cultures also throughout the world.
Right, and so we've looked at the fact that there's certain mathematics that unfolds throughout the planet. One of which is the pyramid, which tends to be a three-sided, or we'll say in that sense tetrahedral relationship. And it's interesting that there are these tetrahedrons around the globe. We've been to China, we've seen the pyramids of Xi'an. There's also pyramids in the Atlantic, in certain areas of the Gran Canary Islands, the Canary Islands. So all over, of course, Egypt and Mexico. But if you expand that, you get to really the dodecahedron, which is a certain sacred geometry. And you have things like the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 disciples. Well, why are these things like this all over the planet? And Dr. Hurtak has had two maps in the Keys of Enoch, I think that's what you're talking about, that pinpoint key areas. Now, the whole globe itself is part of this dodecahedron. There's certain areas upon the planet. But we believe there's major areas, there's also minor areas. So we actually recognize Sedona as being a very special vortex area as well. So it's that kind of sacred geometry that this planet is a part of. And we've done some amazing work, even in the area of Yonaguni, which is Japan, southern Japan, Okinawa area, and there's been sacred underwater structures that have been found there that Dr. Hurtak himself has swam.
Just to highlight this, I'm quoting that from my book, the actual NASA documents showing that the tetrahedral landforms or pyramidal structures on the surface of Mars, that was the first person to release this information worldwide, showing the actual Mariner B-frame designations. So this was not to be seen as an optical illusion, but an actual document designating mathematical distances between tetrahedral relationships and a larger association of landforms that scientists have never been able to fully appreciate. And Desiree mentioned the tetrahedral, but we're talking about the three-sided as well as the four-sided pyramids that we find throughout the Yucatan Peninsula, throughout South America, and specifically in Egypt at Giza. So it's the three-sided, the four-sided, and even the five-sided pyramids that have captured our research in the last 40-some years.
Right, and this is also, I think, what you were referring to, the natural time warp areas used by the brotherhoods, and that's, of course, key. And you can see that these are naturally occurring points. Many people don't realize that off the coast of Japan is a type of vortex, just like the Bermuda Triangle, that things get missing in there and disappear. And we've actually had friends that were in the area of the Bermuda Triangle doing scientific marine research, and they encountered this, we'll say, time warp phenomena, where what happens is everything that's the water becomes the sky, and you can't see the difference between the water and the sky. And the only way they got out of it was following their wake backwards. But they would have been probably sucked into who knows what and disappeared forever like everyone else in those areas. So the same thing happens in Japan. This planet is really just not a sphere. It has energy vortices throughout it.
What I just want to add to that is the fact that the Earth is a living being, so the true purpose of humanity is to help evolve the Earth, so we accentuate these acupuncture points or chakra points with these pyramidal forms to accentuate the evolution of the Earth itself, because we're extensions of the Earth, as all the Native American people have known. We We are part of that. We're not separate. It's not me versus the environment. We are in concert with the environment. And one more thing about the idea of pyramids, people throw that word around, but they don't even know what they're saying. The word comes from the Greek pyramidion. Fire, pyramidion, in the middle. Fire in the middle. These are multidimensional forms that activate a heat or a concentration of light in the center of them. That's why the word pyramid is used for these. And the intersecting pyramids, or tetrahedral forms, actually make up our human life sphere system. These intersections, the Hurtaks work a lot with that, these tetrahedral forms, or this Merkaba body, is what we are. We are walking, breathing Merkaba beings condensed into flesh. But we are the light. We are these spinning tetrahedral forms in different directions.
So,
and so is the Earth.
Show a picture from one of our books drawn by a famous Canadian artist. We see how the human being is a vehicle to capture light, to process light, to transmit light that Alan explained so clearly as light in the middle. We are in the middle between the upper world and the lower world. And to answer your question more completely, our work at the Academy for Future Science has been to work with NASA scientists who are retired, leading anthropologists, those of the indigenous communities, to validate that these 12 areas throughout the world, although seeming to be somewhat mystical and mysterious, are actual energy areas where the upper world is connected with the human world. I think Clifford here to my left can elaborate on this, but one thing I was shown in my experience in 1973, which led to the writing of this book, by a being of higher intelligence called Enoch, is that the indigenous people were the caretakers of the sacred areas of Mother Earth. Unless we were able to work completely or holistically with all of the communities worldwide, we were just working with just one small part of a much larger story. And that has been the problem with traditional religion and science. They've been entrapped in their own language patterns, which are not sufficient to give the larger picture of humanity going through cosmic change.
Right. I also want to say these sacred areas also relate directly to the stars. So as Alan was saying, it's not just us, it's not just the area, it's the whole interconnection with the heavens. Clifford, I know you've done a lot of research and understanding the Zuni and the Hopi. What do you feel about this connection between heaven and earth?
Well, if the human being, or what we call ourselves the children of the star people, we are given a designated duties and responsibilities, like I said, from the Creator. And there are two basic things that fall into this area. First of all, number one is that this is a water planet. Has always been, and this is why they settled here. The different beings from throughout the whole universe, wherever they came from, that's how our history starts. The sky people, or ETs, or whatever you want to call them, they knew this was a water planet. So when they created the indigenous tribes, especially in the Zuni system, that we are two tasks was, first of all, is that we're the interpreters, or we are the caretakers, and to interpret the things that they want us to interpret, and so that we take care of all humanity and all living things on the planet and the planet in general. So when we are given these orders from the beginning, we were given what we call the heart, as they made us to become those caretakers. So we're connected both from the above and also below, and all around. So our God system, our spiritual group system, is based upon the directional, the up, all the directions, and down. If you look at it, it becomes a six-sided. Six-sided, and then of course, when you go into something like the different orders, each one of them are specific. Each one has a specific group that does it. A good example is what we commonly call the Kachina people. The Kachina people are actually the messengers that created us many years, thousands of years ago, and then we now personate them as those people. And they look like space beings. I think the recent, Facebook feature made by Robert Bingham of that, he called it an android. It occurred during the time that the Hopis have their bean ceremony in the winter months after the winter solstice. That's where they grow their beans in the old ways, ancient ways. They used to grow beans in their kivas. And that's the same Kachina that represents that type of the planting and getting the plants ready for the summer. Of course, in Hopi, Arizona, it's wintertime, 0 degrees, so they have to plant. So these are a good example of a Kachina that's way up in the sky. And they took pictures of it. And these are the ones that come back and forth between us and the villages during those times of need. We have to ask for them to come. Now, the other concept that we run by is that in the beginning, when we were being taught how to walk and talk, so to speak, they had to take care of all of us through the evolutionary process. After they created us, it's just like a learning period. So those beings actually used to come to the plazas throughout the whole, probably the rest of the world. But they don't call them Kachinas in their society, they call them a different name. For example, down in Mesoamerica. And we also have the same type of, for example, the plumed serpent. Down in Mexico, they call him Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan. In the Orient is the dragon. In other nations, they have a different name for it. But they're usually the one that comes from the sky. Out here, it's the plumed serpent. The plumed serpent is also part of the ceremonial for initiation process, so we can be like our sky brothers to carry out the functions that is necessary to be here. Require us to be here. So we have all these connectors in here. It's sort of like a mass computer system, each one with a special thing that's downloaded every time that we are growing up, and it comes in steps. So,
no, when you say plumed serpent, I think that's a really important point. Mm-hmm. But what is a plumed serpent? Serpent crawls on the ground and plumed feathers fly in the sky. So we have a serpent that flies in the sky, which is representative of our human potential. We are on the earth, but we have the potential to become these light beings, to raise our wings and to become like these plumed serpents, to function, even though the Kachinas are our higher brothers, let's say, but we can be raised up consciously to that sense of awareness.
Yes, we are moving toward that in a very fast pace.
Yeah. It's interesting that National Geographic, on the cover of its April 2017, has a series of faces representing the new human. As you can see, the anthropological associations, and then what could be called, or is called, the cyber human that runs off a machine, part human, part robot. And my beloved Desiree and I have been very careful in our work to cite the higher beings that we have investigated through former astronauts and even some of the Russian cosmonauts. Are not these robotic beings, but actual beings, more of a spiritual vibration, that are interested in the humanity, not simply doing shop work or medical research, but rather raising the consciousness of humanity. And this is so important in our dialogue this afternoon, and with all of you out there throughout the world, is to recognize we are all being prepared for a major transition. It's simply not information by itself, but it's information with a spiritual direction of bringing humanity into a higher realization that the divine spark is operating within us to see that we are connected with the cosmic family.
Right, and it's not technology. Joseph Campbell said a great line, I think 20, 30 years ago, it's not technology that's going to save the world, it's intuition. So we're not going to reach God by building better machines. We're only going to reach that awareness by going inward and activating who we really are. Technology is great. We don't want to throw it away. It's here to help us. It's here to help our lives be easier and smoother and more connected to each other, but we can't give ourselves over to it. We have to be the masters of the technology, not its slave. So.
And there's so much now that's being taught to us regarding consciousness and understanding. Like one thing is with quantum physics, even coming up with some new ideas, the fact that we're all interconnected. We've done work with remote viewing, and I know that some of the indigenous cultures, at least the ones we've worked with, the Xavante in Brazil, that their minds are all interconnected. I don't know if you get that at all in your culture, but literally you can feel them inside your mind. I mean, this is really high, I don't want to say highest consciousness, but it's higher consciousness, where consciousness is working outside of the body. Consciousness is really linking all of us together. And then we can be really sensitively aware of each other. And I think that's going to bring us into a higher state of awareness. We also have done a lot of work with remote viewing, which is where you would see things on another side of the globe just by sitting here in Arizona. You could see what's going on in New York or in China or somewhere else. And that is part of this whole understanding of the consciousness field, that everything is interconnected. I'd like to know a little bit, go ahead.
No, I also want to ask Clifford, from an indigenous perspective, what you think of this emerging technology and how you relate to it. Is it useful for you, or do you feel like the Zuni wisdom transcends that, it's not necessary?
Well, one of the things that I talk about is that when the sky people, our priesthood of the stars, there's some water here.
Oh.
When in the beginning, and I always reference this and emphasize it, is that in the beginning of what we know in our own indigenous society network system, is that in the beginning, technology and spirituality were one and the same. So in other words, it was part of that. When you talk about remote viewing, that's what medicine man practices are.
Right.
When you talk about laying of the hands, that's what remote viewing is. However, when the sky people, the star people from the different parts of the universe, they gave us additional tools, which is technology. Crystal technology has been around for centuries, for thousands of years. We still practice that today. The other thing too is that when we talk about going into that next higher order, people, it's an initiation process. It's like belonging to a group that is of an order. Medicine Man group is an order. And each one of them has steps. And it's not by testing or anything, it's when they decide by your training in your proficiency, then they go into that. All we're doing is following the protocol set by those spiritual people, the spiritual beings. Here's your template. And when you go into that, here's what you're going to, they don't tell you. You're ready for it, then they put you into that, which is a higher consciousness going. But it's always centered around you, in your love center, your heart or whatever. The technology is right here, using your brain. But all your other systems are connected, and you're directly connected through here back to those giant computers, if you want to call them that, up there. At one time, in the past, they actually used to come until interferences. We still have UFOs today, like we did 10,000 years ago. We still have sky people come visit us, but they have to be invisible. And because of interferences against mankind by other forces, which is human forces. So they have to do, so they're here, and I explained to them, they're here, they're talking, they're listening to us, We just can't see them. So this is why when people go into prayer, especially the Pueblo people, they're always praying. They're always praying everywhere they go, in the kivas, out in the open, the plazas. What they're doing is they're just connecting it so that the rest of the audience will be incorporated by that one circuit, if you want to call it that. So we've always had that within our system. And the technology and the interpretation is the hardest to explain. And I was quite fortunate to learn both sides of it at such a higher level that I can immediately take a prayer or a ritual and connect it into here, whether it be optics, whether it be quantum physics, and I can connect it with there. And then now the other one now is that consciousness, which you can't touch or feel. And so you combine all of these things. You know, the latest thing that's happening is orbs. The orbs have been around forever. However, the technology is not picking them up, which is digital cameras.
Here we have a picture of orbs around Desiree as we were activating some interesting mantrams
In the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid.
a few years ago. And what you say, Clifford, is fascinating because we've been looking at crystalline as well as hydraulic science, the knowledge that the ancient had thousands of years ago. Here's a remarkable picture taken back in the 90s when I was there doing experimental musical tests inside the Great Pyramid. You could see the whole interior of the Grand Gallery light up in golden light. This happened when I was able to strike the musical note, having some background as a singer and musicologist. I was using vocal bowls of the ancient Egyptian, Hebrew, Aramaic to test the sound patterns, and the energy became so strong in this vibratory way, the standing columnar wave of energy suddenly appeared at the top of the Grand Gallery and then shot down like a laser, filling the whole chamber with brilliant golden light for a fraction of a second. Well, needless to say, some of you know that our work throughout the world has been to bring together leading musicians, musicologists, to realize that we're all music. We are a temple of the Holy Spirit, or Divine Spirit, or the Great White Spirit, as the Indigenous refer to the spiritual domain, but we are also an energy field that is largely unawakened, and higher knowledge and higher love, I call it unconditional attunement. The technical word is syntony, the inner symphony of energy that's awakened, allows us to connect with these pyramidal stations or kivas throughout the world in a very remarkable way.
And we actually appreciate the fact that the Native Americans pray, and we also pray to the Most High. But what we feel happens oftentimes is that there are, we'll say, orders in the heavenly realms that actually are able to, on behalf of the Most High, come and make their appearance known. Now, their appearance is oftentimes by just the vibration, the change of the energy field. Sometimes you don't see them, sometimes you do see them. And we feel this is happening more and more at this time. We call it a space-time overlap, where there is an energy from higher realms really interconnecting and interpenetrating with our realm. Now, I admit that the Native Americans have always had this connection, but what's great about it now is that we feel people all over the world are given the same opportunity. We feel that there's a consciousness upgrade that's taking place right now, and things are really speeding up so that we all start interconnecting, not only with ourselves, which is extremely important. We have to, of course, intermingle and have that understanding of interspirituality, of respect for one another, but we also start to and need to develop that understanding of other levels of intelligence as well.
The keys of Enoch call it the gathering of the tribes. That one goes into a greater associationship with those who are clearly dedicated to human and global service. And through that, there is this spark within the eye that understands that the human is a transducer of the higher energy field, the higher field of unconditional love, the higher commitment to positive change rather than negativity. The problems we find in the international media is the scripting of negativity. We see a culture of death being thrown in our face day by day rather than a culture of peace. and this intercultural piece is so important because without it, you cannot understand the pyramids and the kivas as beacons of light, as places for the symphony of eternal life and what the ancient Greeks and Egyptians called the music of the spheres. And Clifford knows, and certainly we also accept the fact that there was once a connection between Egypt, the Zunis, and the ancestors of the North and Central American areas. Very profound.
As well as those in what we would consider the area of Tibet and some of those areas. In fact, Dr. Hurtak was working with an associate while he was getting his PhD at the university that was at least connecting the Tibetan language with the Mescalero Apache. Now, I know that that's a different tribe, but there's these connections that definitely come across from the east to the west and also from the west to the Middle East.
You put an arrow right through Sedona, it will come out in Tibet.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a connection between the language that is being used here by the natives of the Hopi, the Navajo, and others, and the Tibetan language, and then O's of Central Asia. And it's very similar words for the moon, very similar words for certain constellations. We find this also with the peoples that we've been associated with as honorary members of the Shavanti nations of South America, who simply understand that there's a time of passage. And when times become too difficult and too destructive, then the cry of Mother Earth, the cry of the animals, the cry of the hearts that are moved, can open up a portal of communication and can manifest the elders, the star people or nations, or what we refer to as the B'nai Elohim, the sons and daughters of the Most High.
That has always been present to us, but what's happened is this monoculture, this Western civilization that spreads its political agendas and its religious agendas and its media and its news, has wanted to wipe out all these other ideas, our whole connection to these great cosmic brotherhoods. It's wanted us to think a certain way, and it's oppressed people who have tried to hold on to the tradition and their connection. And it's been a very sad chapter in human history, is this suppression and this genocide of alternative views of our spiritual relationships with the stars. It's been awful. So what's happening is we're trying to reestablish an order that the Zunis and other tribes have never forgotten.
If I can add to that, we've done a lot of research in Egypt, and it's very clear from Dr. Hurtak's book, The Keys of Enoch, that the Great Pyramid points to Orion. Of course, Robert Bauval then expanded that to the entire Giza Plateau. But Orion was a key figure in the mythology. We'll say Osiris equated to Orion, and it was equated even by the ancient Egyptians as a type of father figure. Now, what we found out in the Mayan culture, also through Linda Shelley's work, is that Orion was also a key factor in terms of they recognize Orion as the father. So I believe, of course, this also is true for some of the Anasazi and other locations in the area of the Southwest. And so it shows that we're all connected, that there's really isn't this separation. Not to say that Orion is the key, but what Dr. Hurtak was showing was Orion was the gateway. We would call it in modern terms the Stargate.
We were connected from above.
But I want to ask,
and we must be pulsating hearts of understanding from below now to come together if we are going to move positively in a new direction, a quantum shift, as some would call it, a consciousness shift, others would call it, a great awakening, or the coming of a new period of time where we graduate into, should we say, cosmic beings, cosmic citizens.
Clifford, how your tribe and your people have been able to hold on to this
Traditions.
yeah, for so long and keep it fresh and alive for you and the generations to come.
Well, we don't have a written language, and I think it is better that way because you can't erase it and put something else in there. But all the all the Indian tribes out in the Southwest, the Hopi, the Zuni, what they term the Chaka culture, and all others, especially out here, the culture that used to be here, which is the Hohokam and the Nimbus and the Mogollon culture. The key for the layouts of sacred geometry for our system is Orion's belt. The other one, which is the night sky. The night sky is always Orion's belt. All our kivas are positioned like that, so that during the winter time, winter solstice, at a certain time, probably about, I don't have the meridians, what do you call it, the times, but it has happened throughout history before, I would say, about 1900s. That was also the key, what you're calling the key to the universe, the Stargate, if you want to call it that. And in all the pueblos clear up to Taos around Albuquerque, Zuni, other tribes here, Hopi, and all the tribes that were around to the Pacific coast. And when that happened, the traditional curing ceremony for the wrap up the old year and start the new year was based upon Orion's belt at that time, usually about the same time, because in those days they had precise measuring devices, whether it was by a certain other star or a planet. And when the sun started over there, as it went over to the west, then it started, the rituals were started, because it's later over here than over there. So as it goes, then the rituals and the ceremonies started based upon that. And that's where everything opened up. As we still practice that today. But because we don't have the ancient temples anymore, they were destroyed. And we don't have the paraphernalia and the tools that are set up in these sacred places. We don't have those anymore. And there's no way that we can replace an imitation one, because that was the one that was taught by the gods to say, this is your clock, this is your thing. And now you're combining music. Now you're combining the rhythm of the earth with the universe. And we're the ones, the humans, are the ones that are doing those songs and to make those rhythms. And the rest of the whole populations of the individual tribes and villages throughout the Southwest are now in that tune, and they're opened up. And it has been told by me, by many elders, that when those things happen, you can actually see lights that go up to the heavens from all these different places. And now with Google Earth and all that, I've been having some work done with some people that have, as a matter of fact, they were here this past weekend. And they're now showing at Google Earth about things at certain times of the year. So it's always been like that. It's just that, like you say, in the past when we had that entrada of the Spanish imposing a thing, and they destroyed a lot of things in Mesoamerica. They destroyed a lot of places here. So even if you got a fancy machine and they take out the working component of it that starts it up, and they destroyed it, and there was a one-time thing that they gave us thousands of years ago, and here's your component that starts this whole thing. The space opens up, all the things that are up there, all the beings come through there, but now we don't have that key, we don't have that part. So we still got the other. So what we now do is that we request them to come through to us, not for us to go through them. But they have a two-way street with us, and we have to improvise. We're like the Navy.
One of the places that we think probably is very similar to what some of your kivas were all about is Tikal.
Tikal. Guatemala, where we did experimental work back in the 1980s with the Belk Foundation, and we had musicologists at the bottom of the Great Temple #2, and I was the anthropologist researcher at the very top. And I began to use a series of mantrams. And at a certain point, the pyramid began to oscillate
Mhm.
with the expressions I was using. Not only that, but a lightning bolt took place
Mhm.
out of space. It came down, and I didn't know this at the time, but this is a matter of historic record. There was a female voice that was picked up on the tape recorders that they had used.
And it wasn't me.
I took it to Europe and had two known musicologists analyze it, and they said this sound had to come from some paraphysical source. And we know through the ancient language that Tikal means the city of sound, but the anthropologists didn't know what that was. But I would surmise, on the basis of this and other research we did there, that each of the great pyramids or temples was like a piece in an orchestra pit, arranged to vibrate at a certain frequency, and having some musical ability and being blessed with a strong voice, I was somehow there to illustrate that I hit a key vibration, and the whole area began to pulse in a very special way.
Literally, we had thunders and lightnings, but no rain, thank goodness. And Tikal is known for the fact that you could be talking in the central plaza, and then another person can be way up on top of one of the pyramids there, and you can hear them just like talking plainly. So it is a range with certain types of sacred sounds. And we believe that not only did the people of the Americas understand the power of sound in calling forth the light, but also those of the Middle East as well.
So what am I, and Desiree, and Clifford, and Ellen indicating here, there's a map on the planet that we haven't sufficiently understood. It's a vibratory field. And when we can engage in this through higher love, through higher dedication towards all of humanity with the sounds of certain vocables and visual symbols, some would call sacred geometry, certain connections get activated like a circuitry within the body, mind, and spirit. I believe we are moving into this, and we're going to, I believe, in the not too distant future, experience more evidence from these cosmic cultures that want we as human society to grow up and share sounds of celebration, sounds of positive change, and sounds of integrating the various 12 divisions of humanity, which are symbolized by these 12 pyramids of the antiquity periods.
Right, and I think what Hurtak and Clifford are also saying is that we are multidimensional. Our history can point back to the idea that we exist and we are in connection. We've just forgotten it for the last 2,000 years, but we are that. And what, this time is, and I think the internet is bringing people together in a way that, and sharing knowledge. We're now a global planet because these connections are now being made. We're remembering who we are. So I think that answers your question.
Yes. And can you help us understand the cosmological conditions that are making it easier for the average person to connect and activate their divine DNA? Also with the 64 keys, having the spiritual scientific codes for activation, and the role of like the different Arcturus, Pleiades in that.
This all comes down to the precession of the equinoxes that points to a mathematical pattern. Scholars, if you go to the Encyclopedia Britannica, note that the first evidence of the precession of the equinoxes was made in Egypt with the pyramids. I'm showing one picture that was taken in the 1960s when I was there at the top of the Great Pyramid of Egypt. And the study of the movement of the what they call the zodiac, or in the ancient Hebrew, the Mazarot, the signs, but the ancients was very, very important because it helped them celebrate the fact that we are part of an ongoing system of astrophysical measurement, but also the cycles of planning the biorhythms of the body, connected with the moon, with the stars, what we call the exotonal lines of energy, showed us that we were all walking stars. Our blood came out of the ionization of the earth, which came out of the ionization of a star. We were all star children, realizing that we are part of the natural patterns that were also capable of being overlaid by other patterns of vibratory intelligence.
Right, so if we go back to the book of Revelation, the last book in the Bible, it's interesting, we were talking about music, that people are given at the very end of Revelation a new song. And we believe this is really a new vibratory frequency that comes forth to this planet. So we're all operating in a new frequency. And we believe that our original frequency was really more of light, and that we're only temporarily here in this third and fourth dimensional reality, fourth being time, according to Einstein. And that ultimately we are reconnecting with our higher selves. And that's really the culmination of this, what we call Alpha and Omega program. When we get from the beginning to the end, the Omega, we come into a new Alpha. I respect again that the Indigenous people have talked about that we're in the fourth cycle. You know, question is, what's the fifth cycle? I think that's what we're all interested in. Is that fifth cycle going to be physical again, or really have we graduated into a greater light presence?
I was going to say that the Arcturian energies, the Pleiadian energies, the Orion energies are all lending their frequencies to evolving humanity that needs to wake up to its place within the cosmos. So each of these star systems have different gifts for us. The Pleiadians may give us more love vibration, and the Orions more psychic abilities, and the Arcturians may give us more of this awakening to the greater mind. I'm just making that up, so I don't know what's really happening, but they're all giving us different things because we are here at this time of awakening. And the thing about the 64 codons matching the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching means that these 64, 8 times 8, is the way change happens, the way evolution happens in a series of 8. 8 octaves is an 8. So we're moving to the next octave of this vibratory plane. So
I would say this, Alan, in candidness, Duncan Luton, the Scottish astronomer, and others, European astronomers, have shown that there was intelligent signals coming from the region we call Epsilon Boates, or Arcturus. So you're not making anything up. What you're doing is really using beautiful language of your own subjective experiences to identify one of several areas that the Keys of Enoch reference in 64 different patterns for the brothers of light, or the sons of light, or the daughters of light.
And
it's time to unify the language of science and spirituality.
Right. DNA, it has 64 codons, just like the I Ching hexagram, so we are waking up to these vibratory octaves.
At the same time, we must unify the traditions of Egypt with the Native Americans that Clifford so well speaks of, for there were higher connections there, yet to be fully understood.
I was going to say one more thing about Arcturus. It's interesting that, you know, our galaxy, Milky Way, is going this way. Well, they found out now from science that actually the whole constellation connected with Arcturus Boates is actually coming through and penetrating through our Milky Way. So I do think it's here to wake us up.
Yes.
In J.J. Hurtak's book, The Book of Knowledge, he talks about the return of the dove, and this is 144,000 ascended masters coming down in their Merkaba vehicles in the formation of a dove onto the Americas. Can you expand on that?
Well, first of all, here's the picture of the dove, the symbol of peace and universal communication imposed upon the North American continent, where Canada, the United States, Mexico, and the peoples in all of these sectors began to visualize the importance of a new civilization being forged in this part of the world. Actually, the reason they're coming here, according to Enoch, is because of the indigenous heritage that laid the foundation. It's not because of the superiority of Canadian or American political science. It's because of the foundation that's here in this part of the world. And when I speak of 144,000, this is simply a spiritual symbolism for the leadership, not that there's 144,000, that's it. The concept of the ancient science of math, or gematria, 12 to the power of 12, represents a combination of individuals who are able to be key leaders and harnessing the energies of change in a very remarkable way. North America will be the gathering point of teachings from the East and from the West. It is really the central part of how the higher story of a new understanding of evolution is going to be understood. We call the higher evolution. And so in this process, the connection of the North American indigenous with peoples in the Middle East will also come out. We have found evidences of even the Phoenician ships that came up the Mississippi in search for gold and precious metals. But that was a mere 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. We're talking about even earlier associations that go back 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. And so the whole concept of anthropology, archaeology, geology, linguistics, and spiritual cosmology is going to come together in a very significant way. And that is why we require people to have a great dedication to a new type of learning that's going to come through sacred art and music, as well as language, or what I call the language of light. That information by itself and of itself in the classroom situation is not going to be sufficient. It's going to have to be a higher participatory experience where we see ourselves as part of that branch of humanity, reaching out to the 144,000 cosmic leaders from the cosmic or indigenous cultures, the star people coming back to conclude this experiment that was seeded here and planted here well over 12,000 years ago.
Right, and again, we feel that there's many levels of intelligence working with us, and it's really not even just this planet that's making a change. It's actually the entire cosmos, and we're making a change with that cosmos. That's very, very important.
What does Clifford think about
You mean the return of those that were here before? Well, we have been sort of, in a way, probably being tested, if you want to look at it that way, because in all our prayer, ritual, mantras, chants, system, that's what we talk about in song, and in rhythm, and in dance. And what we have been told is that these are the things that you have to abide by, and it's in our prayers. I do a lot of high order prayer systems, where there's basically two things that they talk about. First of all is that the end of those, when you're addressing the whole people, we tell them that we're only talking through the Spirit. So we tell them that we do not know what today will bring. We do not know what the land or the earth will be like. It is only for dedication to the ways that you had given us from the beginning by prayer, by presenting yourself through your heart system and your love back to them and following their protocols, that we will be saved by that. What they also talk about is that this is the Kachina system. We imitate or we personate those beings, so we become part of it. So when we talk to these people that are Kachina people in front of us, and when we represent them, they're the ones that we're addressing them to say that we have done our duty. Now you go back as an emissary. Please give them these things that we have told you today, so that in the future, when they finally arrive, that we have done what we were supposed to have been doing. This is thousands of years. And so we're now at that verge now where we're going into a heavy shift. And my own personal activity and observation in feeling up to this point is that we're at that point. I mean, we can include all this other great system, but coming from a very simple system, although it's very complex. Simple in the way that this is the indigenous tribe of the Zuni people. They have been known this for centuries. They have been practicing for these centuries. So in other words, they say, okay, we are ready. What is the next step? So that's where that prayer of saying that we do not know. However, you people are the ones that will tell us what we're going to do now. I have done my duty here. It's as simple as that. So when you go into the next stage, there'll be something that we have never ever encountered before.
This panel here and all the wisdom and the questions that still remain, the one Clifford just posed, I think is the best one. What are we to become? What's this next phase of evolution going to lead us into? Well, it's not known. If it was known, it would have already happened. There's an exciting future that's awaiting humanity if we could get with the real programs.
Suzanne, we thank you for inviting us.
Thank
we
you.
thank all of you out there. Look to the stars, have a happy smile on your face, and realize we're connecting with our cosmic family.
Thank you so very much.
But could we get a little prayer at the end?
Sure.
Thank you.
1 second, let me get your
Palukkeja tonne on ajat pitää työntää sen kun elämä kaikena on alle palukkeja tonne lisman ian juhetana näsnäpke le aho I ulotan temta on aatatu ia maasjoani on topin te penan illa aavana ak anatun tekui edeteatun lakke lukkeja tonne liston så teusakke tekohan näinsunpa honnaton janatia on ansammo tekohan janitsia tu.
Thank you. Thank you.